In the grand tapestry of interstellar civilization, where 17,000 inhabited systems conducted their daily business with varying degrees of competence, certain assumptions had calcified into absolute certainty. Gravity pulled things down, or in, or occasionally sideways, depending. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content on your planetary orientation. Faster-than-light travel required more energy than most species cared to calculate, and sealed compartments, once properly engaged, stayed sealed until the proper authorities with the proper equipment performed the proper procedures to unseal them. This last truth had held firm for approximately 4,000 standard cycles, which was long enough for even the most skeptical civilizations to stop questioning it. The Velroxy had built their reputation on reliability. Their trader vessels crisscrossed the commercial routes with the regularity of atomic decay, carrying goods that ranged from mundane to exotic, always delivered on schedule, always intact. They were a methodical people. The Velroxy, with their crystalline exoskeletons and their 14-step verification processes for tasks that other species accomplished with a simple button press. Their ships reflected this philosophy. Redundant systems backing up redundant systems, fail-safes protecting fail-safes, and sealed compartments designed to contain everything from hazardous materials to precious cargo in the event of catastrophic hull breach, which made the current situation aboard the trading vessel, Merchandise Perpetuity, somewhat problematic. The ship hung in the neutral zone between the Charvik cluster and the merchant lanes, broadcasting a distress signal that had been carefully worded to indicate urgency without suggesting panic. The Velroxy didn't panic. They experienced elevated concern, which they managed through breathing exercises and proper documentation. Captain Thexel stood in the corridor outside Cargo Bay 7, all four of his primary arms crossed in what his species considered a posture of deep contemplation, while his two secondary arms clutched data tablets, displaying information that had ceased being helpful approximately 6 hours ago. The SEALs engaged automatically, he explained for the third time to the response team that had answered their distress call. Standard emergency protocol. We experienced a minor decompression event in the adjacent bay. The safety systems performed exactly as designed. Commendable, replied the Charvik security officer, her antenna twitching with what might have been approval. The Charvik partnered with the Velroxy on most commercial routes, sharing their appreciation for proper procedure. Your systems functioned correctly. Yes, correctly. Perfectly correctly. Thexil's mandibles clicked together in a pattern that conveyed distress despite his best efforts, which presents our current difficulty. From behind the sealed hatch came a sound. It was faint, muffled by the triple-layer reinforced door and the foam insulation that had deployed during the emergency seal, but it was distinctly audible. A whimpering, a scratching, the unmistakable sound of something alive and increasingly distressed by its confinement. Your cargo manifest indicates Bay 7 contained textile shipments, the Charvik officer said, reviewing her own tablet. Textiles do not typically produce vocalizations. The manifest is accurate for the primary cargo. Thexel's translator chip struggled to convey the particular shade of mortification in his native tongue. However, my offspring, my 3 younglings, they were playing in the cargo areas. We are a family vessel. The children enjoy the space. They were in Bay 7 when the SEALs engaged. A moment of silence followed this admission, the kind of silence that entire diplomatic incidents are built upon. You allowed juveniles into a cargo area, the Charvik officer said slowly, as if tasting each word for its full implication. During active flight operations. They were supervised. Their elder clutchmate was watching them. She is very responsible. 14 cycles old and already studying logistics. Thexil's voice contained layers of defensive justification. The SEALs were not supposed to engage in that bay. The decompression was 3 compartments away. The safety systems overreacted. Safety systems do not overreact. They react according to their programming. Yes, thank you. That is extremely helpful input at this juncture. The scratching sound intensified. One of the younglings was apparently attempting to dig through 17 centimeters of reinforced composite material with whatever they had available. Given that Velroxy younglings possessed mandibles roughly as strong as wet paper until they matured, this was achieving precisely nothing except demonstrating their mounting distress. The emergency release mechanism, the Charvik officer suggested, requires a quantum key signature that can only be generated by a Class 7 engineering team. The nearest such team is stationed at Outpost Meridian. Distance? 4 days at best speed. And the youngling's life support? Thexil's crystalline exterior seemed to dim slightly. The bay was not designed for long-term habitation. Oxygen reserves for the sealed environment were calculated for emergency preservation of cargo, not living beings. They have perhaps 30 hours, possibly less if they panic and increase their respiratory rate, which they were clearly beginning to do, based on the increasingly frantic sounds emanating from behind the hatch. The response team had expanded as the situation developed. 2 Galarian medical specialists had arrived, bringing equipment designed to treat every possible injury except the ones that required actually reaching the patient. A Catherine administrative liaison had appeared to document the incident for the proper regulatory bodies, because nothing said child rescue operation, quite like ensuring the paperwork would be filed in triplicate. And standing somewhat apart from the clustered aliens, examining the sealed hatch with an expression that somehow managed to convey both curiosity and mild boredom, was the human. Humans had been part of the galactic community for merely 73 standard cycles, which meant they were still regarded with the kind of cautious interest typically reserved for species that hadn't quite figured out which end of a plasma torch was dangerous. They held no major territories, commanded no fleets of consequence, and their contributions to galactic commerce consisted primarily of entertainment media and a bewildering variety of chemical compounds they insisted were food. Their presence on response teams was a recent development, part of some initiative about diverse problem-solving approaches that had emerged from the Galactic Cooperation Council after several drinks at their annual symposium. The human carried a toolkit that looked like it had been assembled by someone with only a theoretical understanding of what tools were supposed to do. Various implements protruded at odd angles, many of them appearing to serve no purpose more sophisticated than hit things or pry things apart. Among these primitive instruments, one particularly large wrench caught the light with an almost defiant gleam. "So you can't open it," the human said. Not a question, a statement delivered with the casual tone of someone confirming the obvious. "The SEALs cannot be disengaged without the proper equipment," Captain Thexil corrected. "It is not a matter of capability. It is a matter of procedure and technology." "Right, can't open it." The distinction is significant. Is it, though? The human moved closer to the hatch, running one hand along its surface. The gesture seemed almost casual, but there was something methodical about it, a tactile assessment that didn't rely on scanners or data readouts. "Because from where I'm standing, those sound like scared kids, and this looks like a door, and doors are generally designed to open. This is not a door. This is a quantum-sealed emergency containment hatch with triple redundant locking mechanisms and structural integrity sufficient to withstand direct combat strikes." The Charvik officer's antenna had stopped twitching and now stood rigidly upright, a posture that conveyed deep offense. "Your species may not yet understand the sophisticated engineering required for such systems, but I assure you, this hatch will remain sealed until properly addressed by qualified personnel." The human made a noise that might have been agreement, or might have been something else entirely. It was hard to tell with humans. Their vocal patterns contained layers of meaning that translated poorly into galactic standard. "How sophisticated are we talking?" the human asked. Captain Thexel's translator chip worked overtime as he launched into an explanation that involved quantum-locked molecular binding, fields, synchronized electromagnetic pulse generators, and a fail-safe system that would trigger progressive reinforcement if unauthorized tampering was detected. The hatch, he explained with growing technical enthusiasm, represented the pinnacle of safety engineering. Each layer of protection fed into the next, creating a cascade of security that rendered the compartment absolutely impregnable without the correct unlocking sequence. The human listened, or appeared to listen. It was difficult to determine whether the expression on the human's face indicated comprehension or the mental equivalent of waiting for someone to stop talking. "So basically," the human said when Captain Thexel finally paused for breath, "you made it really, really stuck. That is a profound oversimplification of a complex system, but not inaccurate." Before Captain Thexel could mount a defense of his species' engineering pride, another sound came from behind the hatch. This one was different. Not scratching or whimpering, but a cry, high-pitched and utterly inconsolable. One of the younger cubs, perhaps, finally understanding that their situation was not improving. The human's expression changed. Something shifted behind those binocular eyes, a hardening of purpose that seemed at odds with the casual demeanor from moments before. 30 hours, you said. Approximately, if they remain calm. And they sound calm to you? Captain Thexel had no response to that. The crying intensified, joined now by a second voice, and then a third. 3 younglings who had been playing among textile crates now trapped in darkness, their oxygen depleting with each panicked breath. The human reached into that chaotic toolkit and pulled out the wrench. It was an impressively primitive thing, all mass and metal with none of the elegant design typical of galactic engineering. The tool looked like something that had been invented shortly after the discovery of leverage and had never seen a reason to evolve beyond that initial concept. "What are you doing?" the Charvik officer asked. "Probably something stupid," the human replied, moving toward the hatch with purpose. "But we're doing it anyway." What followed was perhaps the most quintessentially galactic response to an emergency that had ever been documented. Captain Thexel, his concern now elevated to what might charitably be called alarm, launched into a detailed explanation of why the human's apparent plan was not merely inadvisable, but fundamentally impossible, according to the known laws of applied engineering. The quantum lock mechanism operates on principles that supersede conventional physical interaction, he began, his secondary arms gesturing at holographic displays that materialized from his data tablets. When the emergency seal engages, it creates a molecular-level bond between the hatch and the frame. The locking pins, all 72 of them, extend into reinforced sockets that distribute force across the entire structure. Attempting to apply localized pressure to any single point would be like trying to move a planet by pushing against its surface. The human hefted the wrench, testing its weight with a small practice swing that made several aliens step backward reflexively. "Additionally," the Charvik officer interjected, clearly feeling that one species' explanation of impossibility was insufficient, "the tamper detection system monitors for any unauthorized interference. Should it detect vibration patterns inconsistent with normal operation, it triggers secondary locks. The more you attempt to force it, the more secure it becomes. It is, if you will, a self-strengthening mechanism designed specifically to prevent exactly what you appear to be considering." "Uh-huh," the human said, examining the hatch's edge where it met the frame. Those peculiar, forward-facing eyes tracked along the seam with an intensity that suggested actual thought was occurring behind them, though what kind of thought remained a matter of speculation. From within the sealed bay, the crying had taken on a rhythm that spoke of exhaustion setting in. The younglings had been trapped for hours now, their initial panic giving way to a desperate kind of misery that somehow sounded worse than the fear. One of the Galarian medical specialists checked her instruments and announced that the oxygen levels inside were declining faster than initially calculated. The younglings' distress was accelerating their consumption. "The specialized engineering team has been contacted," the Kithrine administrator reported, his tentacles moving across multiple data pads simultaneously in an impressive display of bureaucratic multitasking. "They are en route at maximum safe speed. Estimated arrival, 73 hours, 42 minutes. I have also filed the preliminary incident report and initiated a review of safety protocol compliance." 73 hours, the human repeated flatly. "And they've got what, 30? 28 now," corrected the medical specialist. "Possibly less. So they'll be dead long before help arrives." The assembled aliens exchanged glances, or what passed for glances among species, with varying numbers and arrangements of visual organs. It was the kind of look that acknowledged an uncomfortable truth while simultaneously searching for a procedurally acceptable way to avoid stating it directly. "The situation is suboptimal," Captain Thexel admitted. The hatch gave way with a sound that would haunt engineering textbooks for the next several cycles. It wasn't the clean mechanical release that proper procedure dictated, nor was it the catastrophic failure that safety protocols warned against. It was something in between, a grinding, protesting screech of metal that had been convinced, against its better judgment and manufacturer specifications, to stop being quite so stuck. The quantum lock mechanism, that marvel of modern engineering, simply ceased functioning when confronted with enough percussive maintenance applied at precisely the wrong angle, or the right angle, depending on one's perspective and whether one prioritized theoretical elegance over practical results. Steam vented from the emergency foam system as the seal broke. The hatch swung inward, revealing the darkened cargo bay beyond. For a moment, nobody moved. The aliens stood frozen in various postures of shock, their physiologies united in expressing a collective crisis of understanding. Several tablets slipped from grips gone slack. The Kithrine administrator made a noise that his translator chip diplomatically rendered as untranslatable. The human stepped through the opening, wrench still in hand, and disappeared into the darkness. "That was impossible," the Charvik officer said to nobody in particular. "What we just witnessed was categorically impossible." "And yet," Captain Thexil responded, his voice carrying a hollow quality, "we witnessed it." Sounds emerged from the cargo bay. Chittering. The rapid-fire vocalizations of Velroxy younglings who had gone from trapped to rescued in the span of a few heartbeats. The human's voice followed, lower and calmer, speaking in tones that transcended species barriers. Comforting sounds, the universal language of "you're safe now," that apparently required no translation. 3 small, crystalline forms came tumbling out of the bay, their shells still soft with youth, their mandibles clicking in distress and relief simultaneously. They clutched at the human's legs, their small arms wrapping around whatever they could reach. The human emerged fully, covered in emergency foam and looking distinctly uncomfortable with the attention, while trying to carefully extract tiny aliens from various parts of the rescue outfit without dislodging them entirely. The Galarian medical specialists moved immediately into action, their professional training overriding their existential confusion about the hatch situation. Scanners hummed. Readings were taken. The younglings were dehydrated, oxygen-deprived, and traumatized, but fundamentally intact. They would recover fully with proper care and probably several cycles of therapy to process the experience. "How?" Captain Thexel asked, approaching the human with something approaching reverence mixed with horror. "The quantum lock should have. The fail-safes were designed to. 17 separate redundancies." The human wiped foam from one sleeve and shrugged, a peculiarly human gesture that conveyed everything and nothing simultaneously. The frame was already stressed from your decompression event. Probably bent the mounting just enough to create a weak point. Hit it hard enough at the right spot, and the whole system had to compensate. Once the compensation cycle started, it couldn't redistribute the force fast enough. Everything just sort of gave up. "You hit it," the Charvik officer said slowly, as if testing whether the words made more sense spoken aloud. "You struck a quantum-sealed hatch with a primitive leverage tool, and it opened. Well, I also pried at the seam first. And there was some wedging involved with the smaller end. The hitting was really more of a finishing touch." One of the younglings, the eldest at 14 cycles, had recovered enough to speak. She chirped something in Velroxy that the translator chips rendered as a mixture of gratitude and complete bewilderment about the rescue methodology. "Your clutchmates are safe," the human told her, the awkwardness of the moment apparently outweighing any satisfaction about the successful rescue. "That's what matters." Captain Thexil stared at his offspring, then at the hatch, then at the wrench, then back at his offspring. His crystalline features seemed to process multiple emotions at once, none of them entirely compatible with his species' preference for orderly, emotional categorization. Gratitude warred with professional horror. Relief battled with the dawning realization that he would have to report this incident to his supervisors, who would demand explanations he could not provide. "I will need to file a report," the Catherine administrator said, all tentacles now moving in frantic patterns across his datapads. "This incident represents a significant deviation from established protocol. There will be inquiries, multiple inquiries, possibly an investigative committee." "File whatever you need," the human replied, already moving toward the exit. "Kids are alive. That's what we came here to do." News traveled through the galactic communication networks with the kind of speed typically reserved for declarations of war or announcements of radical political upheaval. Within 6 standard hours, every major station, outpost, and diplomatic hub had received some version of the story. The details varied depending on who was telling it and which species they belonged to, but the core remained consistent. A human had opened a quantum-sealed hatch with what amounted to a metal stick. The engineering guilds were the first to respond, and their response could best be characterized as collective denial. A Charvik Engineering Council issued a formal statement declaring the incident physically improbable pending verification. The Velroxy Institute of Applied Safety Technologies published a 17-page technical paper explaining in exhaustive detail why the reported events could not have occurred as described. 3 separate species demanded access to the hatch for analysis, certain that there must have been a pre-existing malfunction that the human had simply coincidentally exploited. The hatch was duly examined. Scanners were deployed. Molecular analysis was conducted. Engineers pored over every centimeter of the quantum lock mechanism with the intensity of scholars deciphering ancient prophecies. What they found was both disappointing and profoundly disturbing. The mechanism had been functioning perfectly until someone hit it very hard with a wrench. The impact had created a cascade failure in the compensation system, exactly as the human had casually described while covered in emergency foam. "This should not be possible," declared a senior Galarian engineer after reviewing the analysis for the 4th time. "The redundancies are designed to prevent exactly this scenario." "And yet," replied her assistant, a phrase that was becoming increasingly common in engineering circles, "it happened." The quantum lock manufacturer issued a recall notice, then rescinded it, then issued a different notice recommending enhanced physical security measures for critical installations. What those measures were remained vague, but several insider sources reported that the company's research division had begun testing their systems against various impacts from primitive tools. Early results were apparently not encouraging for anyone who had invested heavily in quantum lock technology stocks. Meanwhile, the human in question had returned to regular duties and seemed genuinely confused by the attention the incident had generated. When contacted by a galactic news service for an interview, the The response had been characteristically brief. Hit things until they work. Didn't think that needed explaining. This statement was analyzed by linguists, philosophers, and cultural specialists across 17 systems. Some interpreted it as a profound commentary on the nature of problem-solving. Others saw it as evidence that humans operated on principles fundamentally alien to civilized engineering. A small but vocal minority suggested it was simply an accurate description of human methodology, and perhaps everyone else was overthinking things. The real shift, however, came when the Velroxy parents arrived at the station where their offspring were recovering. The mother, a merchant of considerable standing in her community, approached the human with all 4 primary arms extended in a gesture of deep gratitude. The father, typically stoic even by Velroxy standards, produced a series of clicks that the translator chips struggled to render, but which clearly conveyed profound emotion. "You saved our children," the mother said. "The proper authorities could not. The correct procedures would have failed. You ignored what was supposed to work and did what actually worked." The human looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting weight from foot to foot in that peculiar way humans did when social situations exceeded their tolerance thresholds. "Just did what needed doing. Anyone would have." "No," the father said firmly. "Not anyone. We would not have. We would have waited for the proper team with the proper tools following the proper protocols. We would have documented our compliance with every regulation while our children suffocated. You did not wait. You did not document. You acted." The younglings clustered around the human again, their shells already showing signs of hardening as they recovered. The eldest chirped something that translated as a request to see the wrench, a request that was politely declined on the grounds that wrenches were not toys, even legendary ones. This scene, captured by station security footage and subsequently broadcast across communication networks, did more to shift galactic opinion than any technical explanation could have achieved. Suddenly, the incident was not about impossible engineering or violated protocols. It was about 3 children who were alive because someone had chosen results over methodology. The philosophical implications rippled through academic circles. The Consortium of Advanced Civilizations held an emergency symposium on primitive problem-solving in modern contexts. The discussion lasted for 3 days and concluded with a recommendation that perhaps, occasionally, under specific circumstances, with appropriate oversight, some consideration might be given to direct action when conventional solutions proved inadequate. It was the most radical statement the consortium had issued in 400 cycles. More telling were the quiet changes that began appearing throughout civilized space. A Charvik mining operation reported a sudden improvement in equipment maintenance efficiency after their human consultant suggested hitting things that don't work. A Galarian hospital administrator discovered that a malfunctioning door that had confounded technicians for weeks responded well to percussive encouragement. The incidents multiplied, each one small and unremarkable on its own, but collectively representing a shift in thinking. Hardware suppliers in human-accessible sectors reported unexpected demand for manual tools, wrenches specifically. The requests came through indirect channels, often couched in terms of cultural research or comparative technology studies. Nobody wanted to admit they were stockpiling primitive implements just in case sophisticated systems needed unsophisticated solutions. But the orders kept coming. The human, oblivious to having sparked a minor philosophical revolution, continued working routine assignments. The wrench remained in the toolkit, unchanged and unimpressed by its newfound fame. When asked by a curious colleague whether the incident had changed any personal perspectives, the response was characteristically blunt. Doors open or they don't. Kids needed air. Wasn't complicated. Perhaps that was the most unsettling part for the wider galaxy. To the human, it genuinely was not complicated. There had been a problem with a clear solution, and the solution had been implemented. The layers of protocol, the sophisticated technology, the carefully constructed redundancies, None of it had mattered when weighed against 3 young lives and a ticking clock. Captain Thexel, in his official report, attempted to contextualize the incident within established frameworks. The document ran to 47 pages and included no fewer than 12 appendices. The conclusion, buried in careful bureaucratic language, essentially stated that sometimes the universe cared less about proper procedure than it did about outcomes, and perhaps this was a lesson worth learning. The Velroxy younglings recovered fully, their trauma treated by professionals who used appropriate therapeutic techniques and definitely did not hit anything with wrenches. They would grow up remembering the time they were trapped in darkness, running out of air, hearing the adults outside explain why rescue was impossible. And they would remember the sound of metal striking metal and how impossibility had turned out to be negotiable after all. In the end, 17,000 inhabited systems continued their daily operations with perhaps slightly less certainty about the absolute nature of their carefully constructed certainties. Sealed hatches remained sealed until they did not. Quantum locks continued to function perfectly, except when percussively convinced otherwise. And somewhere on a dozen different stations, in locked cabinets and hidden storage compartments, wrenches waited patiently for the next time that sophisticated engineering needed a consultation with applied force. The galaxy had learned something, though what exactly remained a matter of debate. Perhaps it was that complexity was not the same as effectiveness. Perhaps it was that sometimes the primitive solution was primitive because it worked too well to need improvement. Or perhaps it was simply that when children are crying behind a sealed door, the correct response is not to explain why the door cannot open, but to open it anyway. The human would have settled for any of those interpretations, though likely would have phrased it more succinctly. Something along the lines of, things that need opening get opened, one way or another. The universe had no obligation to respect engineering specifications, especially when lives hung in the balance. And if that meant occasionally hitting things with a wrench until they stopped being problems, well, the galaxy would simply have to adjust its expectations accordingly.